launch. It's okay.
I will now call the meeting to order. I'm Robert Mujica, the State Budget Director, and the Governor has designated me to chair today's meeting. I'd like to note that here as observers, we have Doreen and Sarah, observer for the Senate Majority Leader, Senator John Flanagan, and we have Mark Rozelle, observer of the City Council Minority Leader Stephen Mateo. They're here today. Now, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting of this board, which was held on August 2nd, 2017. These minutes were previously distributed to the members of the board for comment, and I've received none. So with that, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
We have a second? Thank you. That motion has passed. So with that, approving of the motion for the minutes, the next item on the agenda will be the financial plan for fiscal years 2019-2022. So, Mr. Mayor, I understand that you're going to present the city's four-year financial plan to the board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to you and all the board members. I want to thank you for the good work you do on behalf of our city and our state. And I want to, at the outset, thank two of our partners who are indispensable in this work, Comptroller Tom DiNapoli and Comptroller Scott Stringer. Thank you to them and their staffs, and we've all been working in real partnership. Particular thanks to the private members who give of themselves to be a part of this work, John Levin and Lawrence Gullib. Thank you so much. And the Acting Executive Director, Jeff Summer, thank you for all you've done in my time as mayor and before. Since the last time we met, our administration has continued to deepen our commitment to prudent management of our city's finance, which we consider to be a foundation of progressive and responsible government. In partnership with the City Council, we reached an $89.16 billion budget for fiscal year 2019. The budget is based on cautious revenue estimates. This is something we focus on very carefully, and they will continue to be cautious. The budget is balanced with record levels of reserves and an ongoing savings program. I want to thank the members of my team who played a crucial role in this process, our First Deputy Mayor Dean Foulahan and my Budget Director Melanie Hartzog and their staffs as well. Before I review the fiscal year 2019 budget in greater detail, I want to briefly note the continued strength of the city's economy. I can report that over the course of my first term in City Hall, New York City added almost 428,000 jobs more than during any single mayoral term in history. And a lot of reasons for that, but also want to thank the members of my team who played a key role in our economic development efforts. And some of the key investments that we made, I think, were crucial to achieving some of the success, and I'll reference some of them in a moment. Now, at the same time, this is a cautionary note, we must remember the current economic expansion in this country is now stretched to 109 months, making it the second longest expansion in history, and therefore we must always be prepared for a downturn. We believe we are prepared, and we believe very strongly our cautious revenue and debt projections, manageable out-year gaps, ongoing commitment to setting aside unprecedented levels of reserves, and to finding savings are all consistent with the current economic situation. We now have a record level of reserves, a record level of reserves in the entire history of New York City government for fiscal year 2019. We set the general reserve at $1.125 billion, an increase of $125 million. We are maintaining our annual $250 million investment in the Capital Stabilization Reserve. We also added $100 million to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust Fund, which brings it to a record high of $4.35 billion. Approximately $3.6 billion of the various actions I mentioned previously are the result of actions taken by this administration with our partners in the City Council. I really want to give credit to the City Council. They've been tremendously focused on the issue of building our reserves, and I think that's been very good for this city. We have contributed to this progress every year since taking office, and credit rating agencies often cite our commitment to unprecedented levels of reserves in support of our strong ratings, which has helped us maintain the highest credit ratings in the city's history. Across fiscal years 2018 and 2019, we generated $2.1 billion in savings. This includes $421 million achieved through implementation of a partial hiring freeze and hiring delays, and $49 million we saved by reducing 1,000 vacancies across city agencies. Further, because of our year-long savings efforts and cautious planning, at the end of fiscal year 2018, we were able to make a $4.6 billion prepayment on 2019 expenses, leaving fiscal years 2018 and 2019 fully balanced. But we are certainly not done. We will continue to develop and implement new savings measures throughout the fiscal year, and we will roll out a new citywide savings plan in November. Now, I'd like to discuss with you briefly some of the investments we made in the adopted budget. And I made clear back in January at my inauguration, we had a simple concept governing this term. We want to be the fairest big city in America. The actions we've taken in the budget all were undertaken with a simple goal, asking ourselves the question, does this investment, does this action further that goal? And I can tell you that I think we've done some of the things that are really needed for this city. Nothing's more central to our vision of fairness than bringing equity and excellence to all our schools. In fiscal year 2019, in the budget, we expanded 3K for all, which will double the number of new districts providing 3K in each of the next 2 years from 2 to 4, bringing our total commitment to more than 14,000 seats in 12 districts. This is early child education for 3-year-olds that we intend to be fully universal starting in 2021. We're able to do this without increasing spending in fiscal 2019 by repurposing existing funding. With the council, we added $125 million to ensure every public school in New York City is at least at 90% of the fair student funding standard, with a citywide average of 93%. This will help 850 schools across every borough and neighborhood to hire new teachers, guidance counselors, buy textbooks or laptops, invest in arts programs, whatever the needs they have that are most pressing. We also committed $150 million in capital funds towards increasing school accessibility for our disabled students, and that will be over 3 years. Now, we are serious about this notion of becoming the fairest big city in America, and we know we cannot achieve that if people cannot afford to live in our city or thrive here. That is why in this budget we accelerated our spending for supportive housing by $100 million. It is part of our Department of Housing Preservation and Development's affordable housing budget under our Housing New York 2.0 plan, which is our commitment to create and preserve 300,000 affordable apartments by 2026. Again, a city cannot be fair or affordable if some of us cannot even afford to take public transportation. That's why, in partnership with the City Council, we invested $106 million in Fair Fares, a program that will allow low-income New Yorkers to buy half-price Metro cards. This program will be administered by the city directly. Our administration has made a sustained and unprecedented effort to right decades of wrong, to right decades of neglect at our housing authority, and to address the needs of its 400,000 residents. Since I came into office, these investments add up to $3.9 billion in new spending for NYCHA, including $423 million in capital dollars and $241 million in expense dollars for fiscal year 2019. Now, I want to mention two important investments that came after the fiscal 2019 budget was adopted in June. Later in June, we entered into a voluntary consent decree with the federal government that will guarantee substantial new investment in NYCHA for years to come. The city committed $1 billion in capital funds over the next 4 years, and that's on top of all previous funding commitments. In addition to $200 million per year thereafter, as long as the consent decree continues. Another matter, but crucial to the future of the city and to our budgetary stability, last month I announced that the City of New York reached a tentative contract agreement with District Council 37 of AFSCME, the union that represents almost 100,000 municipal employees, about a quarter of the city's workforce. This agreement, of course, is pending ratification by the workforce, but the tentative agreement is retroactive beginning on September 26, 2017, expiring on May 25, 2021. So it takes us well into the future. As part of the settlement, DC 37 will be able to opt in to the New York State Paid Family Leave Program. This benefit is entirely funded through employee payroll deductions, providing a significant benefit to hardworking municipal employees at no cost to the city. Total cost of the tentative DC 37 settlement through fiscal year 21 is offset by substantial healthcare savings and the funding already existent in the city's labor reserve. We will reflect the settlement cost as applied to the entire workforce in the upcoming November plan. Continuing to build off the healthcare savings reached during the first 4 years of this administration, we also reached a second healthcare savings agreement with the Municipal Labor Committee. This agreement will provide total healthcare savings of $1.7 billion through fiscal year 22, $600 million of which will recur annually and will also improve, we believe at the same time, healthcare delivery for our employees. That is in addition to savings for the 2014 healthcare savings agreement between the Municipal Labor Committee and the city, bringing total savings from the two agreements between fiscal years 2015 and 2022 to $10.3 billion, with annual recurring savings of $1.9 billion in fiscal year 2021 and then beyond. To conclude, again, a thanks to this board for your partnership in my term, but also for the extraordinary work this board and your predecessors did in years past to help the City of New York. As we move into our second term, our administration will continue to be guided by a vision of fiscal responsibility, transparency, and a dedication to investing in a growing and thriving and, above all, a fair city in every borough. There is a lot more to do, but thanks to sound financial management, smart investments, we are moving closer to the future where fairness is a defining characteristic of life in New York City. And our fiscal year 2019 budget is certainly the latest down payment on that future. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that, we're going to go to State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for your report to the board. We've distributed copies of our review of the financial plan for the City of New York. I'd like to offer some brief observations for the record. The current economic expansion has been exceptional and continues to set new records. The city's economy added 715,000 jobs between 2009 and 2017, the largest and longest job expansion in the post-World War II period. After growing by 81,000 jobs in 2017, employment reached 4.4 million, a new record and 615,000 higher than the pre-recession peak. Although job growth has since slowed, the city is on pace to add more than 72,000 jobs in 2018. The strong demand for labor has pushed down the unemployment rate. The rate fell from 9.5% in 2010 to 4.5% in 2017. Since then, it has fallen to 4.2%, the lowest level in 42 years. Pre-tax profits in the securities industry, an important component of the city's economy, increased by 42% last year and by 9% in the first quarter of 2018. Bonuses were 17% higher in 2017, according to an estimate from my office. Nearly 63 million people visited New York City in 2017, a new record and the 8th year of growth. These are just a few examples of the strength of the city's economy. The benefits of the strong economy are reflected in New York City's most recent financial plan, which was released in June. The June plan projects a surplus of nearly $4.6 billion in fiscal year 2018, the largest in 10 years. The surplus, which was used to balance the 2019 budget, resulted mostly from a reallocation of unneeded reserves and unplanned tax collections. Tax collections exceeded the city's forecast at the beginning of the fiscal year by $2.2 billion, driven by higher personal income tax collections. Personal income tax collections grew by more than 15%, the fastest rate in 13 years and exceeding the city's forecast by $1.5 billion. Most of the unanticipated revenue resulted from conditions that are not expected to recur in 2019, although tax collections are still likely to exceed the city's conservative forecast. Last year, the city implemented a citywide savings program that is expected to generate, on average, more than $900 million annually. The program relies heavily on re-estimates, funding shifts, and debt service savings. Only a small share of the savings will come from efficiencies that improve agency operations. These resources were needed because new needs increased agency spending by $1 billion in fiscal year 2018 and slightly larger amounts in subsequent years. The growth in city-funded spending is driven by the cost of current labor agreements, agency spending, rising health insurance and debt service costs, and the impact of state actions. The largest state impact comes from the requirement that the city and state split the cost of the MTA's Subway Action Plan. How the MTA's next 5-year capital program is funded could also impact the city's financial plan. Debt service is already projected to increase by 42% over the next 4 years. In the past, similar projections and predictions did not materialize because interest rates remained well below the city's assumptions and capital commitments fell short of expectations. While the city is unlikely to meet its ambitious capital commitment target for 2019, commitments are rising, and so are interest rates. The city also faces a large unfunded liability for post-employment benefits other than pensions. The unfunded liability now exceeds $88 billion, and the out-of-pocket cost will reach $3 billion by fiscal year 2022. To its credit, the city continues to contribute to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which now has a balance of $4.4 billion, the highest amount ever. Conditions at the New York City Housing Authority have deteriorated from many years of inadequate capital investment. Despite commitments from the state and the city to increase funding, the Housing Authority's 5-year capital program addresses just a fraction of its nearly $32 billion in capital needs. The Health and Hospitals Corporation also faces serious challenges. While a 2-year delay in federal cuts has relieved pressure, the corporation must continue to implement corrective actions. Otherwise, the city may be called upon to further increase its financial support. The city's financial plan projects budget gaps of $3.3 billion in 2020, $2.9 billion in 2021, and $2.3 billion in 2022. However, it includes reserves of nearly $1.4 billion in fiscal year 2019 and $1.25 billion in subsequent years. If unneeded, these resources could be used to help close the projected budget gaps. Shortly after the June plan was released, the city reached a tentative labor agreement with District Council 37, as the mayor indicated. It also announced a second agreement with the Municipal Labor Committee to generate health insurance savings. This latest agreement is expected to produce budgetary savings of $1.7 billion during the financial plan period to help fund the 2017-2021 round of bargaining, including $600 million in recurring savings beginning in 2022. If the economic terms of the tentative labor agreement with District Council 37 were applied to the entire workforce, as the city assumes, the budget gap for fiscal year 2020 would reach $4 billion, even after factoring in savings from the new health insurance agreement. While the potential budget gap for 2020 is sizable, the city has a year to close it. In recent years, the city has relied on surplus resources from prior years to balance the budget. To help generate a surplus in 2019, the city will need to implement additional cost reduction measures, but it will also need to limit unplanned spending. Although the current economic expansion shows no signs of weakening after 8 years of growth, rising trade tensions or some unforeseen development could trigger a setback, complicating the city's efforts to balance the budget. In addition, the city's financial plan does not reflect the potential for future federal or state budget cuts. Growing federal deficits, which may reach $1 trillion by 2019, will increase pressure on Congress to cut entitlement and other federal programs, which could adversely affect both the city and the state. In closing, the city's economy is strong, the 2019 budget is balanced, and the city has unfettered access to the credit markets. However, the out-year budget gaps are considerably larger than those projected 1 year ago, and there are budget risks that could make closing them more difficult. To its credit, the city has increased its reserves, a practice that should continue given the risks that are on the horizon. In closing, I'd like to commend Mayor de Blasio, his administration, City Controller Scott Stringer, the City Council, and their staffs for a job well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Comptroller DiNapoli. Comptroller Stringer, do you have any comments?
Yes, well, first I just want to acknowledge Mayor de Blasio, Comptroller DiNapoli, State Budget Director Mojica, and the private members and staff of the Financial Control Board. I'm pleased to report today that our city's economy and fiscal position remain strong and sound. New York City has created more jobs in the years since the Great Depression than during any period in our history, and unemployment is at historic lows across all 5 boroughs. In addition to a strong economy, we have a balanced city budget that addresses a number of important needs, including funding for criminal justice involving our youth, increasing the Fair Student Funding formula the mayor talked about, piloting the Fair Fares program for low-income bus and subway riders, and the list goes on. And since the budget was adopted, the city has reached a contract agreement with DC 37, combined with the new health savings plan with the Municipal Labor Committee. I think it's important to congratulate the mayor, DC 37 President Henry Garrido, the Office of Labor Relations Commissioner Bob Lynn, and Harry Nespoli, and the Municipal Labor Committee on this achievement. It's real and it's important. I do want to say that we do face many challenges here in the city. First and foremost, we are living through a disaster at the New York City Public Housing Authority, which has literally left 400,000 New Yorkers living in deplorable and dangerous situations. Decades of federal disinvestment have left NYCHA with a staggering $31.8 billion in capital needs. In the same vein, our public transit system has begun to physically crumble from years of neglect. These challenges cannot be underestimated, and our response must be immediate and comprehensive. We, the city and the state, must come together to address our common problems. And we all know the city does not have unlimited resources. Last year, we had the benefit of $1.5 billion of non-reoccurring personal income tax revenues. And again, I commend the mayor and the council for their prudence in increasing our reserves and surplus. But I have to say that we have a long way to go and more must be put aside. It's important to note that the budgetary reserves that are actively available to us right now are no more than about $4 billion. Now, that's enough to close the FY 2020 budget gap if everything goes as projected. But I have to say the threat of an expanding trade war and ballooning federal deficits threaten to choke off economic growth. Remember that tax revenues fell by over 7% in fiscal year 2009, the equivalent of $4.2 billion today. A similar decline would double the budget gap in fiscal year 2020. So we must align our spending growth with our revenue growth. We have a very strong, comprehensive four-year financial plan. Together, we must also develop a 4-year savings plan to eliminate the gaps and build up our reserves. We must challenge our agencies to identify more efficiencies and savings, and we must rigorously evaluate our spending and measure the results. Now, I'm pleased to announce today that working together with the mayor and the boards of our city employee retirement systems, our preliminary estimated returns for our pension funds are 8.7%, above our actuarial target of 7%. Together, we have achieved an annual average rate of return of 7.2% since 2014. Of course, we can never guarantee future returns, but these results have helped keep the city's finances on a sustainable course over the past several years. I look forward to working with this city administration and our partners here today to better align our revenue and spending growth rates. That is how we will strengthen our fiscal foundation and continue to move our city forward for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comptroller. Next, we'll have the Executive Director of the Board, Jeff Sommer, give us his comments on the city's financial plan.
Thank you, Chairman. With the aid of a surge in personal income tax collections at the end of fiscal 2018, the city was able to achieve a surplus of almost $4.6 billion. The historically large surplus was generated by the recognition of $2.6 billion of higher than projected revenues, the takedown of reserves by over $1.4 billion, the reestimate of prior year payables by $400 million, and the implementation of agency savings programs totaling over $1.1 billion. The savings were offset by higher agency spending of almost $900 million and an additional $100 million contribution to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which now stands at approximately $4.35 billion. In adopting the fiscal 2019 budget, the city has maintained its conservative approach to revenue projections. It has assumed that all of the surge in personal income tax collections at the end of fiscal 2018 will be non-recurring and due to taxpayer reaction to the federal tax changes and repatriation of money held overseas by individuals and hedge funds. Based on this assumption, the fiscal 2019 revenue picture is mixed. Based on in fiscal 2019, non-property taxes are expected to decline by $270 million compared with the previous year. Despite the weaker non-property taxes, the strong growth in property tax helps lift fiscal 2019 city funds by $958 million. On the expenditure side, the city has used its resources to increase spending and reserves. The budget accommodates an additional $388 million to fund city council initiatives, provides funding for a new Fair Fare program starting in January, and includes higher spending related to the enacted state budget. The city increased the general reserve by $125 million to a total of $1.125 billion and maintains a capital stabilization reserve of $250 million. Over the financial plan period, city fund revenues are projected to increase by $6.4 billion, or 9.8% from fiscal 2019 to fiscal 2022. The growth over the plan is substantially lower than the 13.1% growth rate the city projected last year at this time. The city is prudent to continue its conservative forecasting. In contrast, city fund expenditures are projected to increase by over $8.6 billion, or 13.3%, for an average annual growth of 4.3% over the planned period. The discrepancy between revenue and expenditure growth leaves projected budget gaps of $3.3 billion in fiscal 2020, $2.9 billion in 21, and $2.3 billion in 22. While the city maintains high levels of reserves of $1.25 billion in each of these years, there are concerns in addition to how long the economic recovery will continue that could create increased pressure on the out years of the financial plan. Two areas where in the past the city's financial liabilities were limited concerns the Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the New York City Housing Authority. The state mandated that in fiscal 2019, the city fund half of the Emergency Subway Action Plan. This funding is included in the financial plan. Subsequently, the MTA has developed a plan to upgrade the signal systems in the subways as well as additional improvements in 2 phases of 5 years. While preliminary and unofficial, the first phase alone is estimated to cost over $19 billion. There have been no agreements reached on whether this plan will proceed or how it will be funded. Concerning the Housing Authority, the city has entered a federal consent decree requiring $1 billion of capital funds from fiscal years 2019 to 22 and an additional $200 million every year thereafter to make repairs and remove lead paint until federal court says the project is complete. The Housing Authority's total capital funding is only a small portion of the estimated $31 billion of capital needs. The federal, state, and local government will have to determine how to meet these needs. In addition, we know that the out-year gaps will be higher due to collective bargaining negotiations that are underway. On June 26th, after the budget was adopted and the financial plan submitted, the city announced a tentative labor settlement with DC 37, which still needs to be ratified. The contract spans 44 months, effective September 26, 2017, with compounded wage increases of 7.42% over the contract period. On the same day, the city also announced an agreement with the Municipal Labor Committee for additional health care savings over the financial plan period. This agreement will generate $1.7 billion of savings over fiscal years 2019 through 22, with $600 million of recurring savings annually starting in fiscal 2021. These savings will be used to partially offset the cost of the current round of collective bargaining. Our projections of the out-year gaps, including some other minor risks and offsets, would increase to over $4 billion in fiscal 2020, over $3.8 billion in fiscal 21, and almost $3.7 billion in fiscal 2022. Given the size of the out-year gaps, the city will need to continue developing agency savings programs throughout the financial plan period. The program will have to be larger and contain more recurring savings if the city is going to continue producing large surpluses to close the out-year gaps without service reductions or tax increases. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jeff. Do we have any comments from the private members?
I'll speak on behalf of the private members. On behalf of the two private members, I would like to comment on the city's fiscal condition. Mr. Mayor, you were once again able to manage the fiscal year 2018 budget in a way that built up a $4.6 billion surplus. The surplus was created by higher than expected tax revenues, not needed reserves, and agency saving programs. The entire amount was used to balance the fiscal 2019 budget. The ability to create such a large budget surplus was helped by a late surge in personal income tax collections at the end of fiscal year 2018. The city's forecast for fiscal 2019 assumes that this increase will be non-recurring, caused by taxpayer reaction to federal tax reform and the repatriation of income held overseas by individuals at hedge funds. We agree with the city's and the monitor's concerns that it is unclear how long the current recovery will last or what the impact of federal actions and possible trade wars will be. Therefore, it is prudent for the city to keep using its conservative approach to revenue forecasting. Looking at the four-year financial plan, it's clear that growth in expenditures outpaced the projected growth in revenues, creating out-year budget gaps. According to the FCB staff, these gaps will increase to over $4 billion in fiscal year 2020 and just under $4 billion in 2021 and 22, mainly due to the recently announced labor settlement. Given the size of the out-year gaps, Mr. Mayor, you are wise to maintain high levels of reserves in each year of the plan. We are also confident that you will continue to develop plans to eliminate the out-year gaps with agency savings that have recurring value. I'm not as skilled at public speaking as all of you. We note that as part of the round of collective bargaining, you've reached another agreement with the Municipal Labor Committee to jointly achieve health care savings. This agreement will achieve recurring savings of $600 million annually, starting in fiscal year 2021. This is on top of the $1.3 billion of recurring savings achieved in the last round of collective bargaining. This is important to offset the cost of overall labor agreements. It, however, makes a small dent in the rising unfunded liability for retiree health benefits, totaling $93.1 billion as of June 30th, 2017. As you are well aware, we as private members have for many years expressed our concerns that this unfunded liability was a major threat to the city's long-term fiscal health. We acknowledge your efforts to both reduce the cost of health coverage and adding money to each year of your administration to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust. With your fiscal year 2018 contribution of $100 million, the trust now stands at approximately $4.35 billion. We, however, continue to urge you to do more. We understand that there are many pressures on the city budget, but we believe the city should create a plan to make significant regular contributions to the trust so it will build up over time. The ad hoc approach now used is not enough. Thank you for letting us comment, but I would like to make two other comments with your permission. I made it in the past, and I made it jointly on behalf of Mr. Gall and myself. I think the city, the state, all of us are privileged to have the services of Mr. Summer. He is extraordinary professional, interactive, balanced, and restrains all of us. The final point I make is if you listen, and I say this all over the city, if you listen to the four speakers, there's an incredibly complex fiscal situation, social situation, and I, for one, while not in total agreement, continue to respect and appreciate the mayor's efforts in this complex area.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to one of the
Yeah, if you have any
concerns?
comments, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the private members' view and analysis. I take to heart the concern about the health benefits fund. And I would say, one, we are trying to get at the root cause, and I think more governments should look at this, that the health costs are the area we can most readily address and change. We all know the complexities of pension issues, but one of the things I've felt strongly is the health care savings were the most approachable piece of the equation and needed a concerted effort. And I want to really give credit to the Municipal Labor Committee because they took it seriously too. It's actually a positive example for other governments around the country to see that labor came to the table and really agreed to serious savings. That work needs to continue. So the first point to commend and to amend your point, one of the things that we agreed to with the Municipal Labor Committee was to have an ongoing structure to look for the next wave of savings. And we believe there are more savings out there on the healthcare front alone, so to try and get to the root cause. The second point I want to make is I think your point about regular contributions is accurate and correct. We are undertaking an incrementalist approach. It is not perfect, I'm the first to say, but it is starting to really add up to something. And we intend to continue it. Again, tremendous credit to the City Council for being very much focused on building reserves. I think if we can keep both those strands going consistently over years in different administrations, where the commitment to the fund keeps growing and the commitment to healthcare savings keeps deepening, I think that's how we get to a place that is truly sustainable for the long haul. So I 100% heard everything you said and the guidance to go as far as we can go, but I just want to assure you that we think those pieces are coming together on a regular basis in a positive way.
I think if I may respond.
Please.
Anyone who looks at this has respect for the efforts you've made in this area, which were different and absolutely constructive. And particularly when you measure them against $19 billion for the subway and the housing, it's a question of which priority of problem one tries to tackle with. So I think, I said that with, plenty of opinion, but plenty of respect.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Before we take up a resolution of the Financial Control Board on the determination on the reimposition of the control period, we'll back to Executive Director Summers, see if you have any comments on the staff's determination.
I'd like to review the conditions that prior to 1986, if any of them occurred, would have required reimposition of a control period. The city shall have incurred a deficit of $100 million in the results of operations. As you heard today from all the monitors, the city has ended fiscal 2018 subject to the final audit with a surplus of almost $4.6 billion and has prepaid fiscal 2019 expenses. The city shall have failed to pay principal or interest on any of its notes or bonds when due or payable. The city shall have issued notes in violation of restrictions on short-term borrowing set forth in Section 9B of the Act. And fourth, the controllers shall have jointly certified that they could not, on the basis of facts existing at the time of such certification, make the joint certification required to terminate a control period. What that means is they are certifying that there's sufficient market access for the city to meet its needs. The city has paid all principal and interest on its notes and bonds and has not violated any of the short-term borrowing provisions of the FEA. I have also received letters from the state and city controllers informing me that they do not see any likelihood that they would have reason to issue a joint certification relating to market access. The last condition is the city shall have violated any provision of the Act, and such violation substantially impairs the ability of the city to pay principal or interest on its bonds or notes when due and payable, or the city's ability to adopt or adhere to a balanced operating budget. The city has not violated any provisions of the Act. The staff therefore recommends that the board approve a resolution determining that as of July 25th, 2018, none of the events which would have required the imposition of the control period has occurred, nor is there a substantial likelihood and imminence of such occurrence, and that the city is not experiencing fiscal stress that would jeopardize the orderly functioning of the city's fiscal affairs.
Do we have any comments from the board on the determination? Okay, hearing none, then I'd like to make a motion to, so moved. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is moved, and that concludes the meeting. We'll have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Seconded. Meeting is adjourned.
All right.